I live in a small rental house with my older sister Leah. We split the bills, kept the place tidy, and didn't bother much with the neighbors. It's not the kind of street where you get invited to block parties. Just quiet. Ordinary. Perfect for us. Last October, as the leaves were turning and the air grew crisp, Leah told me she was heading out of town. She'd planned a week-long trip to visit friends in Florida. She begged me to join her, but I couldn't. Work wouldn't allow it. So, early Monday morning, she packed up and left. The first day alone was peaceful. I cleaned up the house, played some music, and basked in the rare solitude. By mid-afternoon, around 2, there was a knock at the door. I assumed it was a package Lee had ordered, so I answered it without much thought. Standing on the porch was a man, maybe in his late 40s. His clothes looked rumpled, like he'd been wearing them for days. He had this unsettling intensity in his eyes, the kind that makes your stomach twist. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer right away, just stared, like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, he smiled, if you could call it that. It didn't reach his eyes. "Just wanted to see who lives here," he said. "Didn't mean to bother you." And then he turned and walked away. Just like that. No explanation. I closed the door, my heart pounding harder than it should have been. The whole interaction was strange, but I shrugged it off. Maybe he was just curious, or lost. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but the following day, after getting home from work around 6, the knock came again. This time, I checked the peephole first. It was him. Same man, same clothes, same eerie stillness. My hands trembled as I cracked the door open, just enough to speak through. "Is something wrong?" He smiled again, that same lifeless expression. "Just checking in," he said, like we were old friends. "Are you a neighbor?" I asked, trying to piece this together. He shook his head. "No, just walking around." That was enough for me. "I'm fine," I said quickly, shutting the door before he could say more. I locked it and waited until I heard his footsteps retreating. That night, I texted Leah. She'd never seen him before. Her response didn't ease my mind. Something about the way he'd looked at me, too long, too intently, made my skin crawl. The next day passed without incident. No knock, no strange man. I started to think maybe I'd overreacted. But Thursday night, that's when it escalated. I was curled up on the couch, watching TV. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the screen. Around 8, I heard it. A faint scraping sound outside, like something dragging along the siding. I froze, my heart racing. Slowly, I got up and peeked through the blinds. The bush beneath the window was shaking, its branches rustling, as if someone had just brushed past it. And then I heard it, footsteps, quick, fleeing into the night. My throat tightened. I grabbed my phone and called Leah. "Someone's outside," I whispered, my voice trembling. She told me to stay calm, to lock the doors. But before I could answer, there was a knock. A loud, insistent knock at the front door. I didn't move. My phone was pressed to my ear, but my voice wouldn't come. Then I heard his voice, muffled through the door but unmistakable. "Let me in," he said. "Please, I'm hurt." I backed away, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. "I'm sorry," he continued, his tone desperate. "I didn't mean to scare you. I just need to talk." The knocking grew louder, harder. "Call the police," Leah shouted through the phone. I hung up and dialed 911, stumbling over my words as I told the operator what was happening. 5 minutes, that's how long he stayed. 5 agonizing minutes of banging and pleading, his voice shifting between apologetic and furious. When the sound finally stopped, I crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. He was gone. The police arrived shortly after. They found no sign of him, no footprints, no indication he'd been there at all, but I knew better. I could still feel his presence lingering in the air. Leah came home the next day, and I haven't seen him since, but sometimes, late at night, I hear a knock, faint, distant, and I wonder if he's still watching. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. It was just before 2 a.m. when I stumbled out of an Uber and onto my driveway. The air was freezing, biting at my skin as I fumbled for my keys, the alcohol still clouding my thoughts. New Year's Eve had been a blur of lights, music and drinks, too many drinks. My head throbbed with a dull ache that seemed to get worse with every step. I finally managed to get the front door open, barely holding myself upright as I staggered inside. My keys clattered to the floor, followed by my jacket and bag. Too tired to care, I grabbed a bottle of ibuprofen from the kitchen, downed 2 pills with a glass of lukewarm tap water, and collapsed onto the couch. The room spun slightly as I lay there, eyes closed, waiting for the headache to fade. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when the doorbell rang. Once, twice, then, over and over in quick succession. Each chime cut through the silence like a knife, sending a sharp pain through my already pounding head. I didn't move. My body felt like lead, and all I wanted was for the noise to stop. Maybe it was some drunk partygoer at the wrong house, or maybe I didn't care. Eventually, the ringing stopped. The silence returned, and somehow, I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up, the room was pitch black. My headache had dulled, but my body felt heavy, sluggish. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and that's when I saw it. A streak of pale light on the hallway wall. It was faint but unmistakable. Moonlight spilling in through the front door, which was ajar. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Had I left it open? No, I was sure I'd closed it. My heart began to race as I stood, the floor creaking beneath my unsteady feet. Before I could even step into the hallway, I heard it. Footsteps, upstairs, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably human. I froze. My breath hitched, my mind racing. Someone was in the house. Without thinking, I ducked behind the couch, my hands trembling as I clutched my phone. But the footsteps didn't stop. There were 2 sets now, moving in tandem, their weight shifting the creaky floorboards above me. Clear up here, a voice called out. Male. Gruff. My blood ran cold. Good. Another voice replied. Let's get to work. The front door creaked shut, plunging the house into total darkness. I heard them descend the stairs, their heavy boots thudding closer and closer. My chest burned as I held my breath, trying to stay as silent as possible. They were in the living room now, just feet away from where I was hiding. Looks empty, the first man said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Figures, the other replied. Let's make it quick. I couldn't comprehend it. How could they sound so calm, so ordinary, while invading someone's home in the dead of night? My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. I stayed curled up behind the couch, my heart pounding so loudly, I was sure they'd hear it. They began rummaging through the house, opening drawers, pulling items off shelves, and speaking in low tones. Occasionally, one of them would laugh, a deep, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. I prayed they wouldn't check behind the couch, but my luck ran out. Footsteps, slow and steady, heading straight toward me. I bit down on my lip to stop myself from gasping. Then, I saw it. The top of a head, just visible over the edge of the couch. One of the men was leaning over, scanning the cushions. My body froze. His eyes were focused elsewhere, but he was too close, far too close. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked away, calling out to his partner in the next room. I didn't move. Not even after the sounds of rummaging grew distant. My muscles ached from staying so still, but I couldn't risk it. They were in the house for what felt like hours. but eventually, I heard the front door open and shut. Silence. I waited another 15 minutes before I dared to move. My phone was slippery with sweat as I dialed 911, whispering into the receiver as I described what had happened. When the police arrived, the house was empty, but my belongings had been ransacked. Jewelry, electronics, anything valuable, all gone. The officers told me I'd been lucky. Lucky they hadn't found me. Lucky they'd only been after material things. But when I spoke to a neighbor the next day, I learned the truth that still haunts me. They'd been watching my house for weeks. Two men, standing on the corner, staring, waiting. They thought I wasn't home that night. They thought the house was empty. But if they'd realized I was there, I don't let myself finish that thought. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. It started like any ordinary evening. Just me and my dog, Hazel, enjoying the quiet after a long day. Work had drained me, so I was parked on the couch with a bowl of snacks and some mindless TV to fill the silence. Hazel, my ever-faithful shadow, was curled up at my feet. Around 8, she got up and padded to the back door, her tail wagging as she glanced back at me. Her signal was clear. She needed out. I sighed, stretching as I got up to let her into the yard. The backyard was small, enclosed by a wooden fence, and bordered by thick woods on one side. It was safe enough, so I rarely kept a close watch on her. As she sniffed around, I busied myself in the kitchen, putting away dishes and tidying up from dinner. The sound of her barking broke through the clatter. At first, I ignored it. She had a habit of barking at squirrels or shadows, but this was different. She wasn't stopping. Her barks were sharp, urgent. I hurried to the back door and pushed it open. Hazel was standing rigid near the side of the fence, her ears pinned back and her teeth bared. She was staring at the woods, barking like something, or someone, was just beyond the fence. My stomach tightened. The woods were pitch dark, an impenetrable wall of black. I couldn't see a thing. "Hazel," I called, clapping my hands to get her attention. She hesitated, her body still tense, then reluctantly trotted back to me. I locked the door behind her and went back to the couch, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Hazel, though, wasn't herself. Normally, she'd curl up beside me or rest her head in my lap, but not tonight. She sat at the edge of the couch, her body stiff, her ears twitching. Her gaze was fixed on the back door, unblinking. No matter how much I coaxed her, she wouldn't relax. "What is it, girl?" I murmured, glancing at the door myself. Nothing. Just the quiet night and the faint glow of the porch light spilling into the yard. Still, Hazel wouldn't settle. Her eyes darted to me for a second, then back to the door, like she was guarding it. Hours passed like this. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made my nerves fray a little more. By 10:30, I was ready to call it a night. Hazel followed me upstairs, sticking closer than usual. I left the bedroom door cracked, as always, so she could wander down to her food and water if she needed to. She curled up at the foot of my bed, her eyes still flicking toward the door, every so often. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually, exhaustion won. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up. The air felt wrong, heavy. I blinked in the darkness, trying to figure out what had stirred me. That's when I noticed it, the bedroom door. I always left it slightly open, just a crack. Now, it was wide open. My chest tightened as I stared at the dark hallway beyond. Hazel was gone. Her bed at the foot of mine was empty. "Hazel," I whispered, my voice barely audible. A low growl came from downstairs. My stomach dropped. Hazel rarely growled, and when she did, it meant trouble. I slipped out of bed, moving as quietly as I could. My phone was on the nightstand, and I grabbed it, switching on the flashlight. The hallway stretched out in front of me, empty but oppressive. as if something unseen was watching from the shadows. "Hazel!" I called again, a little louder this time. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My heart hammered in my chest as I crept down the stairs, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the walls. Halfway down, I froze. The back door was open, not just unlocked, wide open. The porch light casting a pale glow onto the kitchen floor. Hazel stood in the doorway, her body rigid, her fur bristling. She was staring into the yard, into the woods. "Hazel, come here," I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't move. Her growl started again, low and guttural. And then I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the fence. It was barely visible in the shadows, but it was there. Tall, motionless, watching. My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, grabbing Hazel by the collar and dragging her inside. She fought me, growling and snapping at the air, her eyes locked on the figure. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. Hazel barked and scratched at the door, but I pulled her away, dragging her into the living room. For hours, I sat there with her, every light in the house on, my phone clutched in my hand. I couldn't call anyone. What would I even say? By the time the sun rose, the backyard was empty. The woods were still, but Hazel wouldn't go near the door again, and neither would I. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. Tom wasn't afraid of being home alone. In fact, he relished it. With his wife and kids gone for the weekend to visit relatives, he finally had some quiet time to work on his new project. The house was silent except for the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the distant ticking of the living room clock. It was close to midnight when it happened. The basement light flickered on. Tom noticed it from the corner of his eye as he sat at the kitchen table, sketching designs. He frowned. No one had been down there all day. He told himself it was probably just a power surge. Old house, faulty wiring, nothing to panic about. But as he stood to check, he saw it. A dark silhouette passed across the small basement window. His heart skipped. For a moment, he thought it might be a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from the street. But no, the figure was inside the basement. Tom grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a kitchen knife. His hands trembled as he crept toward the basement door, his breath shallow. "Hello," he called, his voice wavering. There was no reply, just the faint hum of the light bulb, still flickering. With one hand clutching the knife, he opened the door. The basement smelled damp, earthy. He descended the creaky wooden stairs slowly, each step groaning under his weight. The bulb above swayed violently, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. When he reached the bottom, he scanned the room, the old washing machine, boxes of Christmas decorations, the dusty shelves. Nothing looked out of place. But then he saw them, muddy footprints. They started at the base of the stairs and led to a corner where an old locked chest sat. Tom's stomach twisted. That chest had been in the house when they bought it years ago. He'd never bothered to open it. It was heavy, the lock rusted shut. But now it was different. The lock was hanging loose, the lid slightly ajar. He approached cautiously, the knife trembling in his grip. With his free hand, he lifted the lid. Inside, he found a mirror. Just a mirror, propped up at an angle. He let out a nervous laugh, relief washing over him. But the moment he looked into the mirror, that relief turned to cold, suffocating fear. The reflection showed his face, pale, wide-eyed, but it wasn't right. His reflection wasn't looking at him, it was staring past him. Tom spun around, knife raised, but there was nothing there, just empty air. When he turned back to the mirror, his reflection was smiling, a slow, sinister grin that didn't belong to him. His knees went weak, and the knife slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the basement walls were swallowing it. The light bulb above him exploded, plunging the room into darkness. Tom's scream was cut off as something cold and heavy wrapped around his shoulders, dragging him back into the shadows. The next morning, when his family returned, the house was silent. The basement light was off, the door slightly ajar. His wife called out for him, but there was no answer. They found his sketches on the kitchen table, the pencil still resting where he'd left it. But Tom was gone. In the basement, the chest sat open, the mirror inside reflecting nothing but darkness. The muddy footprints leading to it had vanished, as if they had never been there at all. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. Jenna thought the move would be the start of a peaceful new life. After years of noisy neighbors, traffic jams, and a constant hum of city life, she craved silence. The colonial house was perfect. Sure, it was old and creaky, but it had charm. A wraparound porch, tall windows, and just enough space for her to breathe. Her first few days there were uneventful. Boxes were unpacked, the floors were swept, and the old place began to feel like home. But the nights were different. The quiet she had once longed for began to feel unnatural, too quiet. The kind that made her ears strain for any sound, even the rustle of leaves outside. And then she heard it. At first, it was faint, so faint she thought she imagined it. A whisper. From the walls. She froze, holding her breath. The sound came again, soft and fleeting, like a breeze slipping through a crack. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. Old house noises, she muttered. It's nothing. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder the second night, persistent. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, as the voices. Yes, they were voices now, seemed to swirl around her. Indistinct at first, but unmistakable. Words just out of reach. Murmurs that made her skin crawl. By the third night, Jenna couldn't pretend anymore. The whispers weren't random sounds. They were calling her name. Jenna. Jenna. It was as if the house itself was alive. She sat on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, clutching a flashlight. What do you want? She whispered back, her voice trembling. For a moment, silence. Then, the voices rose, louder than ever. A cacophony of desperation and anger. Don't leave. She clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. This isn't real. This isn't real, she repeated, rocking back and forth. But it was real, too real. Driven by a mixture of terror and determination, she decided to find the source. She pressed her ear to the wall, trembling, hoping to prove to herself it was just bad plumbing or rodents scurrying in the walls. But the moment her cheek touched the plaster, she felt it. Cold, sharp. It slashed her skin, leaving a thin bloody line across her cheek. She stumbled back with a cry, the flashlight slipping from her hand and rolling across the floor. The whispers turned into screams. Don't leave, you can't leave. Jenna scrambled to her feet, heart hammering in her chest. She bolted for the door, grabbing the knob with trembling hands. It wouldn't turn. She tried the deadbolt. Nothing. The windows. They wouldn't budge. The house had her, and it wasn't letting go. And then she heard it. Heavy, deliberate footsteps above her. The attic. Jenna's breath hitched. She'd never been up there, hadn't even thought about it since moving in. Now the footsteps were moving, slow and deliberate, toward the attic stairs. Toward her. Who's there? She screamed, her voice breaking. The only response was the creak of the stairs as something descended. Shadows spilled across the hallway, long and unnatural. She grabbed the flashlight and pointed it toward the staircase. The being shook in her unsteady hands. illuminating the bottom step, and then she saw it. A figure, its shape wrong. Too tall, its limbs impossibly thin, like branches twisted by a storm. Its face was hollow, a void where features should have been, but its presence was suffocating, and its eyes, deep, endless pits, locked onto her. Jenna screamed, backing away, but the figure moved faster now, closing the gap. The whispers were deepening, echoing in her mind. She tripped, falling hard against the floor, and the flashlight flickered. For a moment, the room plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the figure was gone, but the whispers remained, right next to her ear. The next morning, neighbors reported seeing the front door of the house wide open. Jenna was gone, her car still parked in the driveway, her belongings untouched. The police found no sign of a struggle, just a single bloody handprint smeared across the living room wall, and the faint sound of whispers when the house was quiet. The house still stands, waiting for its next tenant. The whispers, they're patient, and they never stop calling. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. Lily had babysat dozens of times before. It was easy money, and she liked kids well enough. Tonight's job seemed like the usual deal. Watch the Miller kids, Noah and Sophie, for a few hours while their parents went to dinner and a movie. A quiet suburban street, a cozy house, and two kids who barely put up a fuss before bedtime. The perfect gig. By 9 p.m., the house was silent. Lily curled up on the couch, flipping through channels until she found some mindless sitcom reruns. The Millers had a bowl of popcorn on the counter, and Lily helped herself, settling in for a quiet night. But around 11 p.m., her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expecting a message from her best friend or maybe Mrs. Miller checking in. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. Check the kids. Her stomach flipped. She stared at the screen, the words glowing faintly in the darkened room. Maybe it was a prank, one of her friends messing with her. She laughed nervously, but the sound felt thin and hollow in the empty house. Still, she couldn't ignore it. She set the popcorn aside and headed upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpeted stairs. The kids' bedroom doors were slightly ajar, just as she'd left them. She peeked into Noah's room first. He was fast asleep, his little chest rising and falling steadily under his Star Wars blanket. Relief washed over her. She crossed the hall to Sophie's room. The 5-year-old was snuggled up with her stuffed rabbit, her curls spilling over the pillow. Both kids were fine. Weird, Lily muttered, heading back downstairs. She decided not to reply to the text. Whoever it was, they weren't funny. She had just settled back on the couch when her phone buzzed again. Another text. I'm already inside. Her breath caught. The words sent a shiver racing down her spine. She looked around the living room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow, every creak. Her eyes darted to the front door. Locked. She ran to the back door in the kitchen. Locked too. It had to be a joke. It had to be. She typed back, her fingers trembling. Who is this? No reply. Just silence. Oppressive, suffocating silence. And then, footsteps, upstairs. Lily's heart hammered in her chest. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, her mind racing. The kids. She bolted up the stairs, 2 at a time, calling their names. Noah. Sophie. No answer. She pushed open Noah's door. The bed was empty, the blanket tossed aside. Panic surged as she ran to Sophie's room. Her bed was empty too, the stuffed rabbit lying on the floor. No, where are you? Lily screamed, her voice echoing in the still house. And then she heard it. Laughter. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. It drifted up from downstairs, light and playful, as if the kids were hiding from her. But there was something off about it. It didn't sound like Noah and Sophie. It sounded wrong, hollow. Knife in hand, Lily crept back down the stairs. The laughter grew louder, coming from the living room. But when she reached it, the room was empty. The TV was off. The popcorn bowl sat untouched on the coffee table. Her phone buzzed again. She nearly dropped it as she fumbled to unlock the screen. "Look behind you." Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she turned, every muscle in her body screaming at her to run. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was a figure. Tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its face was shrouded in shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly, like embers. And in its hand, dangling limply, was Sophie's stuffed rabbit. Lily screamed, dropping the knife as she bolted for the door. Her fingers fumbled with the lock, tears streaming down her face. She could hear the laughter again, echoing all around her, as if the house itself was mocking her. Finally, the lock clicked. She threw open the door and ran into the night, not daring to look back. She didn't stop until she reached a neighbor's house, banging on the door until someone answered. When the police arrived, the house was empty. No sign of Noah or Sophie. No sign of the figure. But the officers found her phone on the living room floor, a single message glowing on the screen. "We'll be back for you." Lily never babysat again. Make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story, if you dare. Eric wasn't a fan of his new apartment, but it was cheap. And for now, that was all that mattered. The floors creaked, the walls were thin, and the kitchen smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how much he scrubbed. But the worst part, the outdated tube TV the landlord had left behind. He thought about replacing it, but his budget was tight, so he made do, even though the picture flickered sometimes, and the sound was a little distorted. It gave the place an old-school charm, he told himself. That evening, he decided to settle in with a movie. The apartment was quiet, just the faint hum of traffic from the street below. Eric stretched out on the couch, a bowl of popcorn resting on his lap. The glow from the TV was the only light in the room, casting long shadows on the walls. Halfway through the movie, the screen flickered. He frowned, reaching for the remote. The picture dissolved into static, loud and grating. Annoyed, he leaned forward to adjust the antenna on top of the TV. That's when he saw it. A face, a woman's face, pale and gaunt, barely visible through the static. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, her lips moving soundlessly. Eric froze. He blinked, convinced he was imagining it, but the face didn't go away. It became clearer, her mouth forming words he couldn't hear. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice shaky. The face faded for a moment, replaced by lines of static. He reached for the remote again, unsure of what to do. Then the screen flickered, and words appeared, written in jagged, glowing letters. "Don't look behind you." Eric's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounded, each beat echoing in his ears. He gripped the edge of the couch, his eyes glued to the screen. He didn't dare turn. The static shifted, and the woman's face returned, her lips moving faster now, frantic. Her eyes darted as if she was looking for something, or someone. Then the screen flickered again, and Eric's stomach dropped. In the reflection on the screen, he saw it. A figure stood behind him, tall, unnaturally tall. Its head tilted at an impossible angle, its arms long and thin, reaching almost to the floor. Eric's entire body locked up, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He wanted to scream, but the sound caught in his throat. Slowly, carefully, he glanced at the edge of the TV screen, hoping, praying, that it was a trick of the light, some weird distortion. But the figure moved. It shifted, taking a step closer to the couch. Eric couldn't breathe. He squeezed his eyes shut, his mind racing. "It's not real. It's not real," he told himself. But when he opened his eyes, the figure was closer. Its reflection filled the screen, towering over him, its face a void of shadows. And then, it leaned down. The static erupted into noise, a deafening roar that made Eric clap his hands over his ears. The figure's hand, or what should have been a hand, reached out in the reflection, its long, thin fingers stretching toward him. The TV went black. The apartment plunged into silence. For a moment, Eric sat frozen, his body trembling. He turned, finally, his movements slow and hesitant. The room behind him was empty. The shadows in the corners were still. Nothing moved. He let out a shaky breath, his pulse still racing. Just the TV, he whispered. Just a stupid broken TV. But when he turned back to the screen, his heart stopped. The TV was on again. The static was back, but now the woman's face was clearer than ever. Her lips moved once more, but this time, Eric could hear her. It's not behind you anymore. The screen cut to black again. This time, so did the entire apartment. Eric's screams echoed through the dark. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. See you in the next story. Take care.